I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. This is our Friday edition, and we call this the Healing Circle. It's a day that we meet with our colleagues, our affiliates at the uh, African American Child Wellness Institute. Leader of that project, Dr. BraVada Garrett-Akinsanya. She's out today, but we have our esteemed elder and leader, Dr. Oliver Williams, here as well. And of course, me and Brenda Lau Gray from the Insight News McFarlane Media team. And what I want to do is invite anyone that's listening or watching the program from YouTube or from Facebook to send me a note if you want to be in this conversation. Send me a note. My email is al@Insight News. I've got that open. And if you send an email to me, I'll send you a post with a link to the program that can bring you into the conversation. And our conversations are unscripted. We generally are talking about health and wellness, focus on mental health. We're talking about um, uh, what it means for both individuals, families, community, and for society. Dr. Williams is a noted expert on domestic violence and has headed several major institutes, initiatives, and conferences on training, making people aware of, and prevention, analyzing and preventing domestic violence. I think the thought that's on everybody's mind, however, at the moment is what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And I come to this conversation today with several general questions. And I know that my colleague Brenda Lyle was talking to Dr. Williams before we went live with questions she has. She's an educator and has students that she's in regular contact with, and they are raising questions that have to do with Ukraine and Russia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And but before I do that, I want to again thank the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Through them at Black Press USA, we are streaming to Black Press USA YouTube page, and I think to the Facebook page as well. And we certainly are streaming to the McFarlane Media or Insight News YouTube page and Insight News Facebook page. I think we're trying to stream to Twitter too, but I'm not sure that we're successful in organizing that. Our goal is to create a space where we talk, where we share, where we talk about what uh, uh, we think and who we're thinking about, and how we navigate a future, create a future. How do you say the right word? Uh, Create in our mind a future that has us as winners, and that in which humanity, as we understand it, can win as well. So let me start by asking and thanking Dr. Oliver Williams for being here, and asking Dr. Williams, Doctor, what's on your mind today? And just take it wherever you want to go. And Brenda and I will be both students and questioners here,
Okay.
moving this conversation forward.
Okay. So, and I also like the collective think because I don't have all the answers.
Hmm.
But Brenda, you had a question, and I guess I've been sort of thinking about that. So you have a young person that is concerned about some of the things that the president of the Ukraine had to say about Putin, and I think he's trying to get us to take his Putin's wickedness seriously and deal with the consequences of what he might do. And I think, I understand that there was supposedly a ceasefire between Ukraine, or supposedly there in the works a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, or actually Russia to Ukraine. And but it doesn't mean that Putin still doesn't have evil thoughts in his mind about what he wants to do. So to me, one of the things that I think about in terms of being able to deal with the news is sometimes turn it off. And I think you can't. My mother. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about worry for nothing. Don't worry or don't be anxious for anything. And the thing I think about with that is, my mother used to say, so don't put worry on things that may never happen. And I think about with the behavior of Putin, we have to pace ourselves, because if we hear something in the news, there may be other people that are not only thinking about it, but are coming up with approaches to be able to deal with it. And so, and I think you have to be able to, to pace yourself, but also do other things, that are not necessarily directly related to the fear that we have. And so don't worry about it until there's more indications that it's something problematic is going to happen.
I think we have added fear in New Mexico because we have Los Alamos, Sandia Labs, White, what is it? The White Sands nuclear base. So we've got about 4 installations, but I don't think he's crazy, but I think he's borderline. The French president, is it, you pronounce it Macron?
Macron.
Macron,
Mhm.
he said he's convinced that Putin wants all of Ukraine.
Mhm.
Well, when you start tapping into Poland and Romania, it's not going to be nice. And Lord forbid if he ever gets to Venezuela. So I think, and these kids read a lot. They don't read as much as Al and Yusef read, and you. I listed a couple of your books. I think someone picked up Brotherhood and loved it, Dr. Williams.
Brother Man,
Brother Man,
by
yeah.
Robert Taylor.
Yeah, so thank you for the recommendations.
Yeah.
I've been adding them to the end of the article. So, but anyway, I thought it was a legitimate question. I stopped watching the news quite a while back. I had enough layers and I didn't need Putin. But, they email me or Facebook me, and then, I get the news anyway. But, we have to move on. It's out of our control.
Yeah. I remember when I was a young man, and the Vietnam War was going on, and my initial listing was 1A.
Oh,
So I thought for sure I was going until they pulled the lottery, and then I ended up being 364. And so I didn't have to go, but and I remember watching the news and being anxious, about it. And then, people in my age group were being sent, to Vietnam, and then, I saw some of the consequences of people who were sent, and I worried. But there's something about living your life,
yep.
and then also not dwelling on that, unless there was something for sure that said, you got to go show up somewhere next week. You just have to figure out how to continue living your life. And my mother's comment is something that gives me peace, even when I get stressed today. I think about the verses. My wife and I got a plaque that has a Bible verse on it, and it's and it says with don't worry for or be anxious for nothing, but in prayer and in supplication to the Lord. And so that's helpful for me. So
Dr.
Believe
Williams.
me, I know prayer is a powerful computer.
that's right.
Well, let me escalate the conversation a little bit, because what if Brenda's student, we assume that the students in Arizona, New Mexico, somewhere in this country.
Yeah.
But what if that student was in Kiev? I mean, what do you say to that student? And the point I'm making is that, do we have either an opportunity, a value, a reason to, an obligation to see ourselves in that human being's situation, even though we don't know them personally, even though they are half a world away? What is our responsibility? And that's also taking into consideration the wisdom of your mother's quoting the scripture about how to contextualize everything. What is it? What is our relationship to the suffering of other human beings?
To me, I ended up, and my wife Sonia is a social worker too, so we're both social workers. And so I think for me, I grew up as a child with a level of empathy,
Mhm.
and so in caring for other people who are dealing with challenges within their life. So, and to me, I think that's where we have to be. It's when I see things, advertisements for St. Jude's, or for the animals that are out you that are sort of struggling during
Mhm.
bad weather. I feel something for that. So I think it's important for us to have empathy and to uh, feel something when people are dealing with challenges in their life and want the best for them, because you want the best for yourself, and you want people to be there and be supportive if you're going through something. And so I think it's our responsibility to be able to do that and to contribute in some way. If there's a way that for us to be able to do it, to help support them as they're going through different challenges. But for me, also, prayer um, and putting myself in that other person's shoes,
Mhm.
are ways that I can make a connection with them and don't forget them. You know, and so if there are people who are also immigrating to the United States, is there a way for us to be helpful for them as they're making their way here, whether they're Muslim or Christian or new immigrants? How can we be supportive? Of them, and recognize that making those transitions can be very challenging, to be open to a whole different set of other things. You know,
I think
transitions.
one of the things that bothered one of my students was the fact that the men are staying in Ukraine to fight.
Mhm.
The women and children are being moved. Some of the women are having babies in tents. I mean, it's this whole picture and the why. And when you were raised in neighborhood like Al and I, on 28th Street in Brooklyn, and I mean, we had people who had compassion and empathy,
Right.
who cared about other people. And we're in this messy world post pandemic where a lot of that has gone, but we have to remember these children and the millenniums who are stepping forward to try to lead this world. The only thing I could tell Sean was, my heart goes out for Joe Biden. It really does. I don't care what party, what all the crazy GOPs have done and continue to do. But that man has a responsibility from the very beginning of cleaning up mess and then having this thrown.
Mhm.
And I think he's just like in between a rock and a hard place. You tick off Putin too much, and he'll just say, "Well, I'm not going to be threatened by NATO."
Brenda, before we went on the air, you were posing the question that Dr. Williams opened with, but you should pose the question again, because you uh, brought it with a sobering gravity. And would you go through that again? Just say what it was that we started off with. You remember?
Well, you
You
know,
talked.
my
You talked
student
about
said
the.
that
Yeah,
he,
go ahead.
turned on the internet, and that's all he could see with the headlines was the president of Ukraine saying, "Look, if you don't talk to Putin, this is going to be the end of what we know as a normal world." He has the potential of doing that. I don't know if people know that what's going on in Syria, but it's so bad. It's beyond inhumane. He can do the same thing to Ukraine. And then there were a headline. I think one of the kids told me the horrors are, if you think it's bad now, just wait. Well, it, that's just kind of hard to go, even if you're not watching the news. It's real.
Mhm.
And, as adults and seasoned warriors, as I call us, we can kind of handle it. And our spirituality is our foundation. I mean, Al will tell you if we didn't go to church, we didn't go to the show that afternoon. And if we weren't in Sunday school and, doing the pageants and everything, we were involved in our neighborhood churches. It's not that way anymore.
Right.
Maybe, for some, I would love to who was Daryl Gillespie? I would love
Mhm.
to hear him preach, to
Mhm.
go back to what we used to have, because I bet you he could really handle a pulpit. But it's different, and this is different because it's more serious with all of the nuclear weapons that all of these different people have. I didn't know about Venezuela until I started reading about their nuclear capability. That's scary. So, I it's legitimate for adults, and sometimes people, just like the pandemic, just say, you know, that's not my problem. It is all of our problems now.
I keep wondering about how people felt during World War II. And, World War One, World War II, and when we bombed Japan, and we were dealing with the Cold War and nuclear armaments, and the fear that people and dealing with the Cold War, and the fear that people may have felt because people were kind of acting differently than they had, at different times. And I think it's the same kind of thing. And I also so Putin may be a crazy man with his hands on the button, but I think another reality is the fact that there are other people who are, have their eyes on him and understand how crazy he might be.
I hope so.
And if he's, trying to point his weapons at us, then I think there are those who may be trying to point their weapons at him. And the question is he crazy enough to do it without thinking about the consequence? Although he may be able to do something on the first strike, the second strike, he'd have to be concerned. So, and I'm not dismissing anything. I'm just saying that, when we deal with challenges in the world, I think that there are other people who are giving thought to that and trying to figure out ways to respond.
I think it was a good question when this same kid, Sean, asked, he said, why did they not take out the missile weapons or the missile cruise weapons from the very beginning? Because, see, that's where he really hurt, was that he used a cruise weapon to destroy the airport and no one could leave.
Yeah, but they also said that he miscalculated.
Oh, yeah, he did.
And so he thought that he'd already have Kyiv, and they thought that he might have other cities, but it ended up going slower. Now, the idea of them slowing down and having conversations with one another. On the one hand, I'm glad, because that means that there's some lives that are being spared because they're doing that. But the other
And then
side,
some of their soldiers are laying down their weapons.
right?
They're
On the
saying,
Russian
I'm
side,
not going to do this.
yeah, both in Russia and the folks that are in
Ukrainian side.
Ukrainian side
Mhm. Mhm.
are they're saying that for their country and are willing to do that, where Russian mothers are anxious about the well-being of their children.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I thought about is the fact that maybe it's not only the folks in Ukraine that should be anxious. Maybe Putin is a bully, and he's a lot like Trump in terms of his attitude about things, but miscalculating. Maybe it'll be Russians that take Putin out, given what he's doing and the fact that there's a lot of protests within the country. So
one of the kids said, "Could you imagine, B. Gray, if Trump had been president at this time?" He said, "Now that's when we would have been scared."
Yeah, well,
here's the issue in part. Trump is upset with Ukraine because Ukraine didn't follow through and support him in his attempt to besmirch his opponents in the election
when he made that phone call.
Right,
yep.
right. And so he's got a vendetta. And so I'm imagining that Trump probably is feeling this invasion is just desserts for the Ukrainian president having, in his own mind, betrayed him. And so it also says this to me, Dr. Williams, that Trump wanted to and represents the emergence of the American oligarchy. His whole attitude and persona was that people that are rich deserve to be rich and deserve to rule. The golden rule is he who has the gold has the rule. And he's a marketer, and whether he had gold or not, he marketed the perception that he had gold, that he had wealth, that he'd been successful as a businessman. That's questionable whether he was, at least at the level or scale that he said he was or claimed to be. But what he clearly wanted was to be part of a dynastic system where he groomed his children and their close in, their friends, and wanted to create in his cabinet a cadre of people that saw themselves as potentially becoming mega wealthy and being part of his club, his cabal. And I think he saw himself as linking that to other oligarchies around the world. That's why he was enamored with the power that the president of North Korea had, I think, enamored at one level or another with the power of the state, and the wealthy in China certainly enamored with what appeared to be the absolute power of Vladimir Putin in Russia. And I'm thinking that Trump probably would say it's kind of natural and okay if people who have had the good sense and the smarts to amass fortunes collaborate, because between and among them, they could provide better stewardship of all Earth as they raped the planet of its resources for their own good, and probably moved humanity into a system of permanent subjugation. That's what I fear. So I think that this is bigger than Ukraine. Ukraine is simply the theater of the moment. I think that it doesn't do us any good to personalize this as to whether this is Putin's personality. I think his personality, it's a part of it, but it's ultimately irrelevant. What's at stake is the emergence of systems and institutions of hoarding wealth, amassing wealth, and that system itself is able to swap out players when the system sees that Putin is no longer the right point person. It'll say, "Goodbye, Putin. We got 5 more on the bench," and one of them will move forward.
Not as extreme.
Will continue to consolidate power in the world and domination of the planet and control of all human beings. I think that's what's at stake. That's a big, and that could be ultra paranoid. I don't know, but it's worth having a talk.
Mm-hmm. Well, I keep thinking about the fact that Russia isn't the big bad bear it used to be. Their economy is not as strong as it used to be. They may have nuclear weapons, but you have to have resources to be able to drive things. And Russia's economy has been affected,
Mhm.
and therefore their ability to be able to move money has been affected. So if you don't have the ducats to be able to move things, you won't be moving stuff. And
So,
so that's a reality too. So they were having conversations about how they were moving, and said they got stopped in different places, but didn't know the reason why they got stopped. They weren't moving into places like they thought they would. But maybe they got stopped because they didn't have the resources to be able to, fulfill it. And people who are tactical folks said that, the things that Putin was doing in terms of moving troops was amateur. And
mhm.
so I take that balance, so I hate to see the horrible things that they're doing and the people and communities that they're destroying in the Ukraine. But the other side is the fact that, there's some signs that they're not as effective as they claim they would be. And so we'll see what happens.
Quick
I
question.
Go ahead.
Could we have done anything before now? Mitt Romney had warned Biden. Obama had warned Biden maybe around the 1st of February, that the troops and the part of Ukraine was being surrounded. Did we have a responsibility as, at least a perceived leader as far as NATO is concerned? Did we have a choice as to kind of pump this up a little bit, saying, this has potential danger? Was there a strategic plan? I haven't seen that, and I didn't understand why we didn't protect Kyiv.
Well,
Why
I,
we weren't there.
I think you have to do things in stages.
Okay.
And the other thing is that, I thought about Biden as president. I'm glad that our brother in South Carolina, Clyburn, ended up being supportive of him. But the thing I also think is, Joe Biden has been running for a long time to be president.
58 years he's been in politics.
Yeah, and the one reality for me, maybe he's the right man at the right time.
Mm,
And I was thinking maybe he shouldn't have been president beforehand. And
that's a good point, Dr. Williams.
yeah, he's a wise. You know, when I was had my institute, we get a chance to get to locations where Congress men and women were, and senators men and women were, but also where we would see Joe Biden. And some of the people that I've had a chance to meet over the years are as good as they say that they are, and he's one of them to me.
I love the part that I wrote in an article on John Lewis and Joe Biden.
Right.
And they were, the time that he spent with him.
Right.
And then the guys on the train from New Jersey to Washington, D.C. every day, the commute.
Yeah,
and they had some great stories about Joe. He was just, he was a humanistic, loving people, and he has tried to do so much, and those people have fought him all the way.
Right.
And it's because of, so anyway.
Well, I remember him telling the story about the reason why he got into politics. He was really influenced by the civil rights movement.
Yep.
and he didn't want to see those things happening to black people. As a consequence, he got into the legislature, and he tells a story about this uh, about exchanging offices with Strom Thurmond.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. And he made this comment. And so things that we know about Strom Thurmond now.
Racist
And
extraordinaire.
yeah, but he made the comment. He said he remembers why Joe got into politics, and it was because of the civil rights movement. And he says to Joe, "I think it was a good thing that you did that." And he says, and I thought this was a telling comment. He says, not because he said that he thought it was a good thing because he felt as though doing that freed the souls of the people who were racist. The fact that he was working on things to be able to change the way that they lived in the world. And I think he must have been talking about himself because he has black children.
Strom Thurmond, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, the thing is always got me is when I see racists do things that, are crimes against humanity. But then when you see someone that's going through and has been as racist for as long as he has, and then has had this confusion in the way that he's lived his life, and then for him to make a comment like that, I wonder whether or not he struggled, with his racist behavior and the impact that may have had on his children. And the fact that, Joe Biden wrote the legislation around the Violence Against Women's Act. And Joe sort of explained it the same way. Is the fact that by doing that, it helps to free men who are abusive, help to free their souls for the violence that they do to women and men broadly, in terms of thinking about those sets of issues. So, I think he's the right man for the right time in the right moment.
I think that's a great point. And I need to ponder on that one because I really do. He just might be. Definitely wasn't Trump.
No.
Let me Earl Rogers is watching. Brother Earl, thank you for watching. And my brother Greg McFarlane is watching. So is Loretta Arredondo. And actually, I sent the link to you, Earl, if you're still there. And I sent one to Greg as well. If you are available and have the time or the inclination, use the link I sent you and join the program. And Loretta Arredondo is watching as well. Loretta, I don't have your email address, but if you send an email to me to Al at Insight News, or put it in the chat on Facebook, I can send you a link to have you in the conversation as well. This is a wonderful conversation. What I want to do is take a second so that people get a sense of who we're talking to. And I pulled up your bio, Oliver Williams. Let me just share that because it's good to refresh new people who is at the conversation. So Oliver Williams, Dr. Oliver Williams, PhD, is a professor of at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. He was the executive director of the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community from June 1994 to September 2016. And he served as the project director of the African Immigrant and Domestic Violence Initiative from 2010 to 2016, and the Safe Return Initiative that addressed prisoner reentry and domestic violence from 2003 to 2016. He directed the African American Domestic Peace Project that works with community leaders in 12 cities across the U.S. From 2008 to 2018, he has worked in the field of domestic violence for more than 35 years. He's a clinical practitioner working in mental health, family therapy, substance abuse, child welfare, delinquency, domestic violence, and sexual assault programs. He's worked in battered women's shelters, developed curricula for batterers, intervention programs, and facilitated counseling groups. He's provided training across the United States and abroad on research and the service delivery surrounding partner abuse. There's more and more and more, but always good to just remind me and each other, what and where, what you're bringing to the conversation. And Dr. Williams, thank you for all that you've done, all the leadership and the service and the creativity and genius that you've invested in the work that you do. So thank you.
And as my students would say, Dr. Williams, I'm scared of you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
So, I do this all the time, and we'll bring it back around to the topic of Russia and Ukraine. In the back of my mind is the thought, what does it mean for us? What does it mean to us? I call myself an African in the New World. I am an African. I am an American. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm also Afro-Jamaican. I'm Afro-Cuban. And I wear all of these identities at the same time. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a granddad and great-granddad, all those things. And none of them contradict each other. I contain them all. So the question is, in my body and mind and spirit space, how do I contextualize this conflict half a world away again? What does it mean to me? And to contextualize the question, I tell myself and say to community that in all things, we must ask about our core obligation to seek freedom. What is freedom? But we must seek freedom. We're freedom fighters. And how does whatever we do and however we analyze situations, problems, challenges, opportunities, how does that lead to our liberation? And then you can peel that back a little bit and talk about what liberation means to us. Is it my freedom, irregardless of yours? Or is it my freedom as an aspect of your freedom? Is my freedom a reality or not a reality until you and you can be every other human being on the planet are free as well? So those are big picture questions. So I say that to ask you, you mentioned World War I, World War II. Black people fought valiantly in World War I and II. Actually, we were the first to die in the Revolutionary War, right? And we have fought with conviction and abandon, I guess, in defense of the potential and promise of America. What was the calculus that we had, both individually and collectively, that we decided to put our lives on the line, risk and experience death in defense of something? What is it? We're defending the right for white people to enslave us. Were we defending the opportunity for white people to keep us in a second-class status? Were we defending colonialism and imperialism in the world that worked globally, systematically to elevate this erroneous notion of white supremacy and a hierarchical description of how the world is that placed white at the top and black at the polar opposite at the bottom globally? We see that. And were we defending, despite all of those things, the sense that all of that was transitory, that our true path was a path towards transformation, and the transformation was toward the full realization of our individual and collective selves. And that movement towards that realization ultimately had us looking with and through a lens that didn't begin with 1492 or 1619, that didn't begin with slavery, didn't begin with this idea of America as a nation state, but rather have we arrived at a place where we're looking through a lens of antiquity, of an original sense of what it means to be human and what humanity is to all the rest of creation and what role we play in that. So that's a big train of thought kind of idea that I threw out just for feedback, for response. So Dr. Williams, I'm gonna drop it back on you.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that I think about in terms of being a Black man in the United States, for me, is the fact that if I realize what I struggle with and the challenges that I deal with, it should not close me off to other people. It should open me up to the struggles of other folks.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've had friends, close friends, who were in the GLBT community. And so I'm getting more hip to what's happening in the transgender community. Mm-hmm. And there was actually a student that I had that I thought was a man. And then, and I said that I'm still trying to figure out what's going on, mm-hmm. With some of that. And he wrote me a note that told me that he was transgender. And then we had a chance to have conversations about it. I'm still working things through, mm-hmm. because we don't often have conversations about that as much as we should. But, with the gay and lesbian community, a mentor of mine when I was in undergraduate school, it was a person that sort of educated me around it. And he was supportive in my development as a professional. And then another close friend of mine was a woman who we were 19 years old. And then a few years later, she came out as being a lesbian. And shared, those things. And we were 19 years old in undergraduate school, and we've been friends since we were 19, and we're both 69. So and the same, and my wife is Puerto Rican, is Afro-Latina, and then people who come from other diverse communities have enriched me. But when I understand their story, it helps me be engaged with them more, but also helps me to deal with the challenges that they deal with, mm-hmm. and to have a more broad lens in the work that I do, but also the work that they do, and that they have to do to be able to survive and to continue advancing within their particular communities and such. So it shouldn't shut me down. It should help me become more sensitive and open to other communities. And I've had the opportunity to work with different populations and communities around the world. And so, and I guess the thing that I'm more likely to direct myself to is to people who are also looking for freedom. In a true sense of it, people that have been oppressed, been affected by white supremacy in different ways and its different forms, and to err on the side of people who are dealing with those challenges. Because I think it speaks to me too. I mm-hmm. understand it because I've lived it. Mm-hmm. And it should open me to understand somebody else's experience.
So the next part of my question was, do we recognize this as a moment in time of the evolution of humanity's ability to see past and see through the structures and systems that are debilitating? Maybe it's the capitalist structure. Maybe it's, again, if you try to conflate capitalism and white supremacy, maybe that mindset, that ideation now becomes more visible and therefore more susceptible to dismantling at our hands. Um, and I raised that question because of, when Black soldiers came back from World War II and serving in Europe, were met with the Red Summer. And as I understand that, a summer where whites who said Blacks were stepping out of their place because they'd been to Europe and outside of the confines of American apartheid, they had to put them back in their place, and our communities were attacked and destroyed, and riots, white riots, destroying Black life and Black property across the country. After World War I, as World War II developed, Black leaders again said, no, we have to go and fight for this country because we thought about, would there be any advantage for us as Blacks in America if we gave up living with the Klan that we're living under now in favor of Nazi Germany, should it win the war?
Right.
That life for white people would be materially the same either way. They could be part of the Nazi apartheid, the white race dream that they fantasized, and still be suppressing Black and brown people. In fact, one of the reasons for the emergence of Germany in and through that war was the fact that they were left out of the partition of the Black world of Africa, and they fought to insert themselves back into a global power situation. So we had a reason to not accept or expect or to support what Germany represented, what Nazism represented, but we also knew that it was creating pressure on this country, and the pressure it was creating created a leverage opportunity for us to say, we can help fix this.
Right.
But here's the exchange. We need freedom.
Right.
And we mobilized and galvanized and brought our lives and our blood to the service with the expectation, the bargain that things changed. Of course, they did change, not a lot and not quickly, but they have changed and they continue to change. So do we see the current crisis? Should we see it in that light? How do we leverage it, not to be selfish, but to continue to press forward towards our freedom with the belief that the freedom that we seek ultimately is the freedom that will free both Ukraine and Russia as well. It will free the Klan from the sickness of the Klan mentality. It'll free white people from this ill-begotten notion of white supremacist thought. What do you think?
Well, for me, I think so. I remember during World War II in St. Paul was a hotbed of anti-Semitism, and that there were a number of people who were dealing with challenges in the city of St. Paul related to, how they were treating and interacting with Jews. There's NPR used to have stories where they told the stories of people and the challenges that they went through as Jews in St. Paul, but also across the country. And there's a video, and you should be able to get it on go to the internet and look for a film called The Shadow of Hate. And The Shadow of Hate was interesting because it ended up telling the story and challenges of racism in the United States, where they would have rallies and marches in Washington, D.C. of the Klan and other groups, and that has an impact. And because I keep talking about my dad, but because my dad, was born when he was born, 1898, I got a chance to hear stories from him about the challenges that he had to go through and the racism during his time, which was different than the racism that I had to go through during my time, which is different than the racism that my son had to go through during his time. And the things that we're able to see that we couldn't see at different points of time, or having two. So we look at NBC News or Lester Holt as the anchorman,
Mm-hmm.
and see NBC Today, where two women are the hosts of the show,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have and so seeing those things, or you have two people who are broadcasting who may be of the same race. When you couldn't, I remember when we were kids. Remember when you used to call and find out when the Temptations were going to be on? Ed Sullivan.
Everybody turned it on. Oh,
That's
yeah.
right. And so, and then it's not that big a deal for, young people today.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's the push and pull of it, is the fact that the fight continues. But if you're able to look back and then and look at the present, there are things that we can see that didn't exist when we were let me say me, when I was younger.
And we were young.
You're younger than me and Brenda.
Yeah. So,
Dr. Williams, I have a quick question, and maybe Al can add to this because I know we're running out of time. But I was sitting up here thinking, are there two definitions of freedom? Is there, I know when I think of Bernard, Al's cousin, and he would have been in the White House by now, no question. That's just how powerful he was. Freedom meant something different to Bernard Powell. You're not going to look at my black skin and determine who I am if you don't know my name. So that's kind of where he was. His brother his twin was the intellect, so heavy that we couldn't even understand. We had to pull out dictionaries. But there was Bernard, who had a different look at what freedom meant to him and to the chocolate baby boomers that were in that era.
Yeah.
Today, freedom is something else. And I don't know if it changed with George Floyd. George Floyd has had such a powerful impact on race relations everywhere you look, even in the arts.
Right.
But freedom is different now. I live in a complex where there were Proud Boys, and every time I would walk around one of the sides of the complex, he would spit at my feet. Well, I wasn't free to punch him and say, leave me the hell alone, because I would be the black woman who, so I don't have that luxury of that type of freedom, and especially in current times. But when we were growing up, we had a different kind of freedom, and it was tied into the confidence and the pride and the support and the moral standards that we have. And not only is there a racial divide, there's a moral divide that I don't know. And I'm like some of my students, I am perplexed. And oftentimes it's very difficult for me to write about it. I know I have to. And I know I have somebody with a micro, looking over my words, and sometimes he understands what I'm trying to say. But it's a different type of freedom now that is at stake.
It's true, and I think when I was younger, it was an issue that we had to resist more. Not on a more differently, and because there weren't as many things that we've become maybe more used to, because there was more collective effort to resist. And I remember integrating the schools that I went to a private school, but they weren't into wanting to integrate Black people.
Oh no, they burned ours down, Dr. Williams.
And so, and mine was a school of faith.
Which
Wow.
one did you go to? Which one?
It's in Michigan, Lutheran East. It's outside. It was outside Detroit,
Okay.
in a suburb of Detroit on the east side. I lived on the west side of Detroit, but it was on the east side of Detroit, and it doesn't exist anymore. They still have Lutheran West and a few other Lutheran schools, but they weren't having it for the middle schools as well as for in the elementary schools as well as for the high school. So we started out with 16 African American students, and the thing that motivated them was that they were afraid that their funding was going to get cut if they didn't have more kids of color. So we all went through to St. Philip's, and then which was a mostly Black middle school, or elementary school and middle school, and we went to Lutheran East. And so we started out with 16, and there was only 3 of us that graduated.
No.
Me, Ronnie, and Reggie. And Reggie ended up becoming a fighter pilot in the military.
Wow.
And then Ronnie and I ended up going to Michigan State, and then I continued on, with things. So
I know we have a couple minutes left, Dr. Williams, but I would like to just have a closing statement from one of my students. Be great. Why does it have to be this way? Why does it? How come we can't? I think I wrote that line, Al, in one of those recent articles when I said we want a reserved seat at the table. We don't want to have to bring our chair. We want to be there at decision making, and that's what we were on the front line at 14 and 15 years old. The Jewish patrons who supported all of our movements, especially in the rich white plaza area, they would bring us sandwiches and coffee when we switched shifts. We need the Stacey Abrams mobilization today because we're running out of time as far as the November 2022 and the midterms. But I don't know. GOPs look like they're a little bit shaky right now.
You think about the Ukraine and Putin and where Donald Trump stood on that. But I realize that you have people who are committed to racism.
That's it, and it will not move. Keith Ellison says that all the time.
The other side of it is that we won't move either.
True.
So, Doc, do we need to create? I know that we always have our family and neighborhood discussions about, analyzing whether things are racially motivated or not. We call it the way it is, and we're generally right. We know that white people choose to not believe us, or they won't always say that things that happen that are dastardly are one-of events. But when it's one of, 20 times a day in 20 different neighborhoods in 20 different cities, it's a system, it's a process, it's institutional. And so they want to be able to deny the institutionality, the structural nature of their proclivity to suppress and divide and destroy and deny our people.
Right.
Ought we elevate this is a thought just from listening to you today, and maybe we do it already, but I'm just raising the question, elevate our intentional study of deficiency in white culture and talk about the sickness. Should we move more boldly, more aggressively to analyze the sickness that has allowed them to be what they are right now as a danger to us, the world, but also ultimately to themselves? I heard the term way back when was like Pax Americana as opposed to Pax Americana or Pax Europa. So they've been a pox, a virus on the planet, and planetary cultures have suffered at the viral expansion of white supremacist driven populations. So what do we do? And let me actually stop that. Don't answer. We'll come back to that next week. It's a good question to think about. I want to ask people that are listening to think about it too. Let's have that discussion. With that, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for being here. Thank you, Brenda. It's been a great conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.